I'll just want to send my girlfriend like a nice romantic TikTok, and then I'll be like, nah, cringe, what a loser. But then I will send it, and she'll be like, oh my God, it's so lovely. That's awesome.
I'm sitting here today as someone that is curious and open-minded, and I can put my hand up and say, hey, I'm not always going to get these conversations right, but I'm open to learning.
I need to be really beautiful and constantly self-optimize. I need to be desirable, but don't be desirable because then I'm a slut and I'm going to get absolutely ripped down.
I just think like everybody has got this kind of idea that I have to be this like sex fiend who this is what I'm about to prove something to the boys. I want to kind of be a bit suspicious on that and call the bluff. Like, I actually don't know if that's how we all really want to show up.
Traditionally, gender and identity have shaped so much. What we wear, how we're expected to behave, the roles we should fill at home or in the world. These gender expectations set certain rules and ideals. They tell us that the ideal man is a mythical 6'6", over 6 feet tall, 6 inches, and earning 6 figures. These expectations tell us that when a woman has sex or enjoys it, she's a slut, while men who don't want to have lots of sex are frigid and not real men. Gender expectations have shaped our lives in all sorts of ways, some obvious and some subtle. But who decided all these rules, and is it possible to break free from them without backlash? We'll also dig into why acknowledging intersectionality, which is a fancy word for overlapping identities, matters. No one's experience is ever just about gender. Joining me for this conversation on the couch is Daniel Principe, a youth advocate and educator.
It's good to be here.
And Blake Pavey, a comedian who knows firsthand the pressures that come with labels and how to laugh at them.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Gina Martin, a gender equality activist and facilitator who's been tearing down stereotypes for years.
Thanks for having me.
And Brodie Grundy, a thinking man's AFL player.
Great to be here.
Brodie, obviously a lot more than that. You play for the Sydney Swans. You're committed to making meaningful impact both on and off the field. So thank you all for being here and being a part of this very important conversation about gender and identities. They can feel a little bit awkward and embarrassing, but hopefully we'll get into the nitty gritty of them. We can't have a rule on this podcast that there are no silly questions, and you can ask any question, even if you feel quote unquote silly asking it. So in the spirit of that, why don't we all go around and ask a silly question, and then hopefully throughout the podcast, we will answer it and revisit it. So Daniel, you can kick us off.
I think something that comes across my desk all the time is, has gender equality gone too far? Has pushing back on stereotypes gone too far? And, what is it then to be a man? Like, what do you want us to be?
Okay, yeah, very interesting. How about you, Gina?
I think something I hear a lot is like, what's all this gender stuff about? Like, is it even for me?
Right.
That
okay.
idea that maybe it's for trans and non-binary people, but maybe it's not as relevant for like your average man or your average woman.
Okay, yeah, of course. Alrighty, perfect. And Blake?
One that I get a lot is, especially from younger sort of dudes that come to my shows, they talk a lot about what's the bare minimum they can do to support women and make them feel safer, or I think they're just confused on what to do.
Yeah. So they are saying like a frustrated way, like
A little bit, yeah,
Okay, yeah.
I've really censored it.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting. And how about you, Brodie?
Yeah, one that I hear is that sort of conversation that's just for the woke people. That's
Right.
not for me. A little bit similar to what Gina was describing, where it's for others to have that sort of conversation.
Right. So like a conversation like this isn't for us to be having,
No, it's
or if we are, we're too woke.
too woke.
Okay, interesting. Alrighty, we'll hopefully come back and answer all of those. We might kick it off though by just thinking back to when we all first became aware of gender expectations. So I might start with you, Blake. Was there a moment as a kid that you realized, oh, boys are supposed to do this, girls are supposed to do that, and that's just what's expected of us?
I grew up in a really small town in country New South Wales, a little town called Corowa. And growing up in the country, that I think from the get-go, that's just, it's very black and white in the country of how you're supposed to go about things. But my family was quite the contrary to that. Like, my brother is a musical theatre performer and has been dancing since he was about 5 years old. But, doing that in a country town, you can imagine what you come up against as a boy trying to perform in any capacity whatsoever. So even just like watching his experience going through school, it was, if you're dance, like automatically gay,
Yeah.
like you should be playing footy or doing a sport, but that's just for the chicks, that sort of idea. So that was something I sort of had to have a third person view of for, pretty much until he moved to Melbourne to actually pursue it.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I'm trying to think, like when I grew up, like with sisters, it was, I played footy,
Mm.
they all danced. And so it took me a while to clock that it doesn't have to be that black and white. But did you realize a bit younger that obviously, you don't have to fit into like the neat little box that we mentioned at the start?
I think I did, but also like I danced with my brother for a couple of years, but then I sort of fell into the idea of like I shouldn't do this because this is not what my mates who play footy and play Call of Duty do.
Yeah, right.
So that was something that I sort of grappled with for a little bit, and that's when I went off into other sports that I still enjoyed, but even in just other areas like, singing and stuff like
Yeah.
that, it's just like that's automatically, oh, it's a bit, So like even stuff that I'm grappling with now, like I don't sing in the car or anything like that. And I think it's because I just grew up thinking, nah, can't do that.
Yeah, right.
That sort of idea.
What was your experience, Brodie? Because obviously, you went down the footy route. Not saying it's because you're like a traditional, stereotypical footy boy, but like,
jock.
yeah, jock.
Yeah.
But, it's obviously it is looked at in some circles as sort of the peak of masculinity, and you've gotten to the pinnacle of that. So what was your experience growing up?
Yeah, I think growing up for me, my two best friends in primary school were girls. One was probably at the time was described as a tomboy, and I didn't really know what that meant at the time. I just loved spending time with my best friend. We would ride bikes and get up to mischief and just hang out and have a good time. But there was always this construct around, that she was a bit different, like not
Yeah.
a regular girl at that point, and she was a very talented athlete in primary school, and she would always win the long distance races. And there would always be commentary that I would get beaten by a girl. I didn't really quite understand why that was considered
Mm,
to be losing was worse when you lost to a girl,
yeah.
because she was just my friend.
Yeah.
But at that point, I started to cotton on to the expectation that boys and girls are different.
Yeah. There are so many of those little like turns of phrases. I mean, you go play golf with someone and you do a shit shot and someone's like, "Oh, you dropped your lipstick, mate." Like stuff like that is everywhere. Really interesting that was your experience growing up, Brodie. What about you, Gina? When did you sort of first become aware of gender expectations?
I think it's a great question and it's a hard one because I'm looking back going, oh, at 4 I realized, but really I didn't have the language, right? Like I had experiences that when I later reflect, I realized that that's what I was seeing. A lot of those kinds of comments around femininity or girls being associated with being something bad or weaker or embarrassing, and like hearing a
Right.
lot of that as
Yeah.
a girl. But really sadly, when you asked that question, what immediately came up for me was being like a young teenager, like maybe like 13, and seeing as I developed through puberty, like grown men look at me differently because I was a child, and then suddenly grown men would look at me in a way that they hadn't looked at me as a child. Um, and weirdly, that sticks out as like a formative experience of
Yeah.
being a
Wow.
girl, which is kind of sad because there was lots of joy in being a girl, but it's kind of pitted by this kind of objectification memory. Um, so then that was the moment when I was like, oh, I'm a girl, oh, I'm feminine, oh, that. And I kind of only recognize it by being looked at, which is a really, you could go for
Yeah.
years into unpack that probably.
Yeah. And I feel like I would imagine that's something that hasn't really changed over the years. Like people you'd still feel that
Yeah, the feeling of being watched or being looked at is a constant, yeah, experience.
just to the guys in the room. Has anyone ever felt that? Because I don't.
No.
No, not at all.
Well, I'm happy for you guys. I'm happy you haven't felt it.
Yeah, that's tough to deal with, I imagine. Dan, what about you?
Yeah, I think for me as a soft, sensitive boy, I just look back to my biggest fatal error in high school, which was crying.
Mm.
I was having a pretty tough time at home and, made the mistake. And obviously, I'm saying that sarcastically of getting overwhelmed, not because of what was happening in class, just like I needed a circuit breaker and I had to step out of class because I was emotional and overwhelmed with things. And look, I was a soft, sensitive boy, so I was copying it anyways, but that was just then amplified from that moment onwards. And I would say even up until uni, just continued to be policed because I could never be tough enough or perform this kind of calloused version of myself to fit in. And so I think, yeah, that was my continuous reminder that I wasn't like the other guys.
Obviously, you sort of embraced that side of you, I imagine, with your work at the moment. Was there a period of your life where those experiences shaped you and you went the other way a bit just to fit in?
Yeah, I think come year 10, 11, when people started experimenting with all sorts of things, there's a sense of I got to take some risks and got to be kind of part of the boys. And there's a protective factor in that. It's like, I got to join this pack. Otherwise I may be humiliated by this pack. And so I did feel that tension and wrestled with that. And then I think by the time I hit the end of high school, I'd become a bit more comfortable and not conforming to it. But gosh, it was so hard because you're just trying to survive.
Yeah.
And without the language, the tools, and to be honest, the sense of self-respect and self-esteem to like stand on your own 2 feet, to be able to, I guess, resist that to some extent.
Did you feel that, Blake, growing up, that you had to, I mean, you kind of alluded to it by going back to sort of footy, and I don't know if that was because you didn't necessarily enjoy dancing or if it was from the pressure of friends and, you know, just school in general?
I never felt that pressure from my mates inherently. I always felt it from like their parents and people in their family. Like I would always go to mates' houses and see how their parents were different to mine. And just the comments that they were making to
Right.
my friends, like, you know, the amount of times like my mates got called gay from their dads was a massive one.
Yeah.
For doing stuff that me and my brother were also just doing at home.
Brodie, did you have any experiences like that in high school or just growing up where you felt like you had to change yourself a little bit to fit in, or when you entered the AFL system even?
I think for me, growing up, I had a really strong presence from my mum, and she obviously had quite traditional sort of feminist traits that she empowered me with. So there's always that strong group norms and group think, particularly with going through high school. You're sort of trying to grapple with, hey, I need there's safety in the pack, there's safety in the norm. But she always encouraged me to, sort of follow my moral compass and just be myself,
Yeah.
whatever that meant at the time. So, I was getting some different messages at home around, I remember sort of year 6, year 7, leaving school for the day. And I'm not sure what your experience is while it's at school, but the boys and girls would hug each other goodbye. And I remember sort of going home to mum at the time and saying, who I was really close with, I have a really good relationship with my mother, and I'm saying, Mum, I feel a bit like, I don't know why people are hugging. Like, I'm going to see them tomorrow. Like, why are boys and girls like hugging each other? And she would say, like, you don't have to do that if you don't want to. Like, you don't have to always fit in. So it was just subtle comments from her at home of a non-judgmental view for me to just go out and be myself. And then obviously when I moved at 18 to play professional AFL football, traditionally a hyper-masculine culture, there was inherently some challenges with that. Just as simple as, drinking beers on the weekend to socialize, punting, horse racing, just things like that growing up, I didn't necessarily gravitate towards. And so there's inherently challenges with that as well. When you're trying to develop new support systems, new networks, develop friendships, historically, that is just the way, even my friends that live in the country, it's just like, let's get pissed and go watch the footy. So if that's not something that you're passionate about or something that aligns with who you are, it can be really challenging.
I really like what you said about sort of going back home to your mum and asking about that. I personally feel like I would have gotten great advice from parents at home as well, but then I still would struggle with like the pressures the next day at school. Like, I don't know if I would have been able to sort of go, oh no, I'm not going to do that and hug. How did you find that? Like, obviously getting permission from a role model at home to follow what you want to do, but then getting back into that environment where it's quite hard to swim against the current. How did you go with that?
Yeah, I think that's why role models are so important, whether they're male or female, mum or dad, brothers or sisters. I just an extremely supportive network at home that just subliminally reinforcing for me to just be autonomous and be myself. There's always a balance about
Yeah,
when
of
to come
course.
back into the fold and have banter and, be one of the boys.
Yeah.
But then there's also a time when you need to have an understanding about who you are as a person, what your values are, and be dead set on trying to be the best person you can be.
Awesome. And so, Gina, we've obviously been talking a lot about masculinity and femininity and gender at the start here, but Would you be able to sort of define the difference between sex and gender for us? And that might even tie into your silly question about who should be involved in the gender conversation.
Yeah, and I'm really glad you asked this because often like we start these conversations without those like really basic definitions. Um, the difference between sex and gender, I feel like often you'll ask people and people will start by saying something like, oh, sex is like genitals, or they'll say like sex is medical or biological. The kind of definition of sex and how we determine sex is that it's a series of physical, internal, external characteristics that have like really important medical relevancy. So that's things like growth hormones, genitals, chromosomes. And when you're born, obviously, you pop out, probably not pop out, it takes a long time, a lot of effort. And then a doctor looks really quickly at genitals and goes, okay, they assigned a category, right, to male, female. That's sex. Sex is actually a spectrum. Intersex people exist, many, many different types of intersex people. And then gender are the like traits, rules, attributes that we apply to that sex category. So they might be culturally determined or historically determined or socially predetermined. They're things like men or boys are strong, girls and women are emotional. So gender is, I like to think about it like sex is a medical determiner. It is a spectrum now, and gender is a spectrum, but it's kind of like a bunch of rules and ideas that we apply to that.
Okay, wow, great explanation. So then there's obviously the word cisgender gets mentioned a lot these days. Would you also be able to define that, please?
Yeah, so cisgender people like me are people whose gender meets and twins with the sex they were assigned at birth.
Okay.
So the way that they feel in themselves, the way that they see the world, the way that they understand themselves, both internally and externally, matches the sex
Yep.
assigned at birth. Yeah.
So is your silly question around like cisgender people don't necessarily feel responsible to be part of this conversation?
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting because I've worked with people of lots of different genders, right? And I think there's sometimes a kind of question mark around just the topic of gender. Like gender, when you say the word, I say, oh, often I work in gender work, and people will go, so you work with trans non-binary kids. Often people think that's the case.
Oh, right.
As if people who are gender diverse have to deal with gender, and then people who are male and female kind of don't. It's not as important for us. And I think that's probably just a little bit because, like we say, we just don't have these conversations that much. We grow up as cisgender people, so me as a woman, you as a man, we're growing up, and there's not really a whole lot of conversations that are asking us to reflect on our experience of our gender, on our gender expression, on our gender identity. When we hear those words, we probably more often see them represented alongside trans non-binary people.
So Dan, why do you think it's so important for cisgendered people, I guess like us, to be involved in these conversations?
I think like everything, it relates to our own lives. It's actually about how we experience ourselves, one another, and the world. And so, yeah, for me, I think we have to find ways that translate, that connect with others who aren't au fait with like the latest kind of gendered language. And
Yeah.
I'm pretty big on that because I'm like, that also can alienate people who maybe don't know how to be part of these conversations. I think we have to be able to connect and relate in a way that brings people in. And I guess for me, I think about the language that I'm using, and when I'm especially speaking to my audiences, which are like 90% teenage boys, I want to talk to them about like healthy and unhealthy stereotypes and different ideas that we've received from role modeling to fashion to advertising to video games to group chats to sport and how that's shaped us. And so I think I try to do my best to do that in a translating way where we don't get into, it's not to say there's not a place for the language and the jargon, but I just try to do it in ways that's more accessible. Because as I say to boys, like how you relate to yourself as a man, how you relate to other men and what it means to be a man and how you relate to gender and stereotypes, like that actually is going to play a huge role in shaping your life, how you experience and how you experience others. So that's kind of how I anchor it in the sense of this is why this matters, because we are all living out of the stories we tell ourselves about men, women, and what it is to be human. And so what are those stories? Are they healthy or are they harmful? Are they actually helping us to connect and interrelate?
I love that what you touched on about the language and translating it, but if almost the use of that language might come back to sort of your point, Brodie, at the start about when that language is thrown out there, people all of a sudden reject it and go, oh, that's woke shit. And I'm always like cautious that I might not have the right language, but I'd like to get it right to, make sure I'm being considerate of everyone. So why do we think some people reject it? I mean, I'll throw that one out to anyone.
Those conversations just aren't really happening. Like we haven't had them before in ways that are like inviting and like also like fun. Like in our workshops, like the way that this place can actually be like a really fun interesting place to be where you feel really connected to people. And we're just not really having those conversations. So it is rare, like fairly new in the mainstream. And no one wants to feel stupid. No one wants to feel the whole problem we have around gender is that all of us feel judged and like we're not enough and we're like we don't belong with ourselves and with other people. So when we bring language in that makes us fearful, it's a real shortcut to someone being like, no, this isn't for me, I'm off. Because
Yeah.
it's new, because it's uncomfortable. So I think what's really important about what you said is that like we have to create those spaces where it's really easy to have this conversation. And then slowly our ability to hold in that tension and in those spaces where it feels a bit new grows because we're just doing it more, right? It's like working a muscle.
Yeah, absolutely. Does anyone else have any thoughts on why some people might reject it and go, oh, that's just woke, it's not for me?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's just like also like even just looking at sort of the political landscape of what's been happening. I think those words like woke and like masculinity and feminist, they've all been sort of weaponized to sort
Absolutely.
of push an agenda. People from the country, just you say like feminist to them, it is like a trigger word to them. But even using the word trigger word to them is a trigger word to them.
Yeah, yeah.
And they get it evokes something really sort of I don't know how to describe
A
it,
strong
but it's
reaction.
yes,
Yeah.
it does. Yeah.
I suppose the question is, well, why? Like, what is that? And is it threatening of some construct that we have of ourselves, ego, whatever it is, which is what we're here to explore?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Well, it is tightly wrapped to all of our identities.
Yeah.
I mean, at the end of the day, this cuts through every human heart, every human experience, for better and worse. And so I think for me, like, I get it. And for me, I try to have as much empathy as possible, especially when I am traveling to places where you have people from all sorts of cultural backgrounds, all different socioeconomic backgrounds. Not everybody's had an opportunity to go to an inner city university like me and do a postgrad there. So I have to be gracious. I have to be kind to people who haven't necessarily had this opportunity. And I don't know in their circles, those words, what it provokes in them. So for example, in my sessions, a young boy might analyze something I've got up on the projector, on the whiteboard, and he might use the language like toxic masculinity. And I don't just go, oh yeah, tick that box. Yeah, how right are you? Well done. I go, oh, interesting phrase. Like, can you tell me what that means? Like, what does that mean for you? And like we actually explore it. And then I want to check in with the rest of the room. And then I say, I get why that can be helpful and accurate to describe things. Like I know what that means for me, but and how it's used in academic circles, but like how do we actually then connect? Because if we're going to talk, we got to have shared meaning.
Yeah.
We got to
And
understand
you got to
one
give the
another.
time for that.
Absolutely, to take them on the journey. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, actually, yeah, maybe there's some things that like make a decent man, and let's be real, a decent human, that we can all now start to articulate or subscribe to or say, yeah, that's good for me and that's good for all of us.
Dan, you touched on this idea of like there's restricting framework to be a man, and there's this idea of the man box, which I don't really fully understand myself, but I believe you're quite across that. Would you be able to explain the man box for us?
Well, shout out to the fantastic humans at Jesuit Social Services who have put this research together. I use it in my work, so thank you so much to them. And I guess what they've tried to do is make sense of the different messages that boys and men have felt that they need to subscribe and adhere to about relationships, power, gender, sex, drinking, racism, like just different ideas, and how much we either subscribe or don't subscribe or partially subscribe. The research shows that the men and boys who feel most tightly constrained to these visions of this vision of masculinity, where it prizes power, control, dominance, that isn't able to kind of integrate, I guess, healthier ideas of what it is to be human. Like these guys aren't actually faring too well. Like, and that's the tragic reality is like they're 8 times more likely to struggle with suicidal ideation. They're more likely to self-harm. They're 3 times more likely to not enjoy life at all. Like they're not thriving. So I'm not judging these men who feel like really bound up in this tight vision and like, I got to be this tough guy and, do that. Like, I'm kind of going, man, we got to find a way to get them care, connection, community, and some permission and space to go, hey, like maybe there might be something that's more comfortable or suitable or healthy for you that gets you to show up more fully. And the worry is not only are these guys at risk of hurting themselves, they're really at risk of hurting others. They're 35 times more likely to sexually harass a woman, to be physically violent towards men. They're 8 times more likely to sexually assault. So it is caught up with some ideas around power and dominance and control. And I just want to kind of, gently suggest like maybe there's some other healthy things that we can integrate with this vision. And it's not a judgment of them. It's just kind of politely and gently invite the question, like, how's that working out for us, for you, for all of us? And maybe we could reimagine something in this space.
Wow, those stats.
Huge.
Yeah, wow, ridiculous. Oh my gosh. And you just sort of touched on the end, like some healthy masculinities. Gina, what do you think sort of healthy masculinity looks like?
I think we can get really caught up in being very singular about it, right? We can be like, okay, so restrictive masculinity, or these like gender stereotypes that say you got to be strong and you got to be, happy, banter, angry, or an island, and you've got to be in physical, and all these kind of man box attributes that are quite restrictive. They are very prescriptive. That's kind of the problem, because like a person, how many billion people, how many men do we know, how many boys do we know, how many people do we know? All different backgrounds, all different experiences, all different feelings, very like, a rainbow diverse of people with all of these different qualities, and then they're meant to fit into this box. And that's why it's harmful. That's why it's a problem. So then if you just go, here's a new box that's healthy, there's also prescriptive. I'm like, cool, we're just kind of using the same framework we have a problem with before. So I think when I think about healthy masculinities, and I'm really specific about using masculinities, because like your masculinity is very different to my dad's masculinity, which is very different to your masculinity and my best friend's masculinity, right? It's about being like, this is a humanness of masculinity. Healthy masculinities looks like a type of masculinities, whatever that looks like for you, that causes you less harm and other people less harm, and allows you to be your whole human self and not feel restricted by your gender. And that's going to look different for all different types of people. But that feels like I just think such a beautiful place for us to get to, that people can just be their whole self and not like a role self.
Which benefits everyone. Like it
Yeah.
benefits men, it benefits women. Yeah, that's a really great way to look at it. And Brodie, I imagine like in the AFL world, there might be some pressure to fit into the man box. So what's sort of your experience or observation in that space? And actually, has it changed from like when you started your career to now?
Yeah, well, I just wanted to go back to what Gina said around healthy masculinity and some of the ingredients that, before coming on this podcast, I posted a story and saying I'm going to be exploring some of these concepts, and I had over 300 different replies from the community around what they thought healthy masculinity was, and some of the key sort of themes coming through that I definitely sort of subscribe to was ingredients of empathy, respect, and and Dan spoke about not necessarily being a healthy man, but a healthy human. And I think, trying to decouple that concept of, it's a gendered construct to just a human construct of trying to just be a good person as you can be. It doesn't mean you're not going to make mistakes, but just like owning them, as we all have, owning them and just looking for continual improvement. So I just wanted to caveat that. And another one that came through was around sort of emotional regulation and self-awareness. And that's something that actually, it's been quite profound, the work that we're doing in the AFL now, or particularly say with the Swans, is around sort of discovering who we are as people first and foremost, because our athletic performance is always going to be secondary to who we are as people. So even at the professional level, we do that work. Like we see that as really meaningful work. It hasn't always sort of been that way. When I first started playing football, even as a junior, you are conscious of those archetypical constructs around masculinity, the stoicism, leadership through physical toughness, the difference between being assertive and dominating. But the longer I've sort of been in the system, or just the longer I've sort of grown as a person, I've seen a real beauty in a shift, or a balanced view, and having stereotypically more feminine traits of emotional intelligence, empathy, listening, deep listening, and what that does for a space in a community, and how the best leaders couple those those different spheres where it's like I have deep connection and deep empathy, deep listening, And then when it's time to step in to, my masculine, when I'm playing, I'm assertive, I'm strong. So there's a spectrum in which I think the modern player, well, I speak probably not for everyone, but for myself, there's a fluidity in that. And the longer I've played, and I suppose the more experiences I've had as a person, I've found that there's great power in that.
Mm.
Can I pick up on that with bros? Is like, because yeah, like with this, I think sometimes I want to be careful what I am saying and what I'm not saying, because sometimes people listening can hear this. And I'm just thinking about all the young lads who have said, sir, but what about this or what about that? And what comes up is like, are you saying that like we shouldn't be strong or we shouldn't be tough? And I'm like, absolutely not. Like every single human possesses strength and has had to show toughness, grit, resolve in life, period. Like no matter who you are. But I just push back on like, but is that just physical strength? Because I'm kind of like, yeah, I'm not really that interested in how much you can bench press. Like, do you have strength of character? Like, can you show up fully, authentically as yourself? Can you stand up for what's right when the time calls for it? Like, that's what I'm interested in. Again, a more expansive vision of strength. And I had these boys push back on me recently, and I love it because that means they're actually interested and we get to go deeper. And they said, yeah, but so we should be tough. And then I just flip it and I say, but is there space for you to be tender? Because like tough is great. And there's places in life that we're all going to have
Yeah.
to be tough, irrespective of who we are, irrespective of that. But I was like, is there a place for you to be tender? And do you know those places? And can you show up like that in those spaces? Because yeah, I think that is just so important. And the challenge, and this is where it's like for me to have empathy for boys, but all young people, but boys especially, like they're punished for being loving, kind, respectful, decent in all different ways. And we have to do something culturally to normalize that is expected of them, that this is just how we all get to show up in life. And when I run a workshop with boys and we unpack what makes a good man and a good human, the word love or loving like never comes up, maybe 1 in 100. Now, is that because they don't believe that that's who they can be or should be or already are? No, the younger fellas will tell me it's because it's seen as weak or feminine to be loving. Like what a travesty that the most powerful force in human history that has caused man, woman, child to sacrifice all. And I'm not just talking romantic love, but like love
Yeah.
in every, like weak. And I'm like, what a travesty that,
Yeah.
Yeah, what
like,
a trick to
yeah,
pull on
what a
people.
trick. Yeah, I love that is. I hate it, but like I love that you say it is. It's a
You're
trick.
tricked into seeing love as a bad thing or something that you can't have expansively in your life because you'll be policed if you do.
Absolutely.
That such amazing points from everyone there, and I just want to pick up on sort of at the end, like you were mentioning, these young boys see love as weak, politeness, kindness. They're punished for it. I think you
Yeah.
said. Do you think then, Blake, that maybe people stay in this man box because that narrow idea of what a man should be is actually rewarded in mainstream society, to use that term, and then the rest is punished?
I think so. I mean, I even like that feeling of thinking that being loving is, inherently feminine or weak or, whatever it may be. Like those are some things that I still like, even though I know that that's not the way to think, I still catch myself in those moments, I guess. Like I'll just want to send my girlfriend like a nice romantic TikTok and then I'll be like, nah, cringe, what a loser. But then I will send it and she'll be like, oh my God, it's so lovely. That's awesome. And so it's always just little things like that that I have to sort of catch myself doing. And yeah, and even just like going back to the word woke, like I feel like my interpretation of it has always just been like empathy.
I just love your honesty.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
love
Yeah.
that reflection. And I think we all owe it to one another to be like, hey, I'm on a journey and I'm still on that journey and I'm going to be on that journey of working that out for me.
And all those little moments that you've just spoke to, the first thought you have is society, the second and third
Yeah.
is becomes your own. Like you have those moments where you're like, I'm not going to do that thing. And you can see in that instance how that man box or those gendered expectations are robbing you from a moment of connection or a moment of authenticity, just in the smallest way. But when there's 100 of them, when there's 1,000 of them, that all are different, we can see the impact, right?
I think actually maybe you can correct me here if I'm wrong, Brodie, but I feel like the AFL world might actually be slightly ahead of the game. Like clubs have lately, I think, seen a lot of benefit and there is reward in, breaking out of the man box. And, all the recent, if you're not a fan of AFL, like the recent clubs that have won sort of the premiership at the end of the year, which is the ultimate goal, have sort of preached how much their togetherness and emotional intelligence played a role in it. And I feel like maybe would it be fair to say that sort of the rest of society, not the whole rest, but some of it, like whether it's corporate Australia or, in high school, people aren't seeing those benefits or aren't doing those things because they don't see the benefits the way the AFL world has?
Yeah, I would say, just echoing what Dan and Gina said around that expansive view, I thought it was a beautiful way of contextualizing what we're talking about today. And I think what's happened is the AFL or sporting teams has seen this as a competitive advantage, which is unbelievable.
Yeah.
And corporate Australia, whatever it is, whatever team, whatever high performing setting you're in, having deeper connections and a deeper understanding of self and others, it unlocks innovation. It unlocks psychological safety to explore and challenge in a safe way. And I just think there's only so much you can do with team strategy, the X's and O's. There's so much more profound meaning. Say if you don't win the premiership, typically it's considered a failure. The season's a failure. But if you can nourish and take these moments along the way to explore and have these deeper connections with people that you love and you spend so much time with, then like you're winning like every day. You can still win, irrespective of what the scoreboard looks like or whether you get to hold up a shiny cup at the end of the season. Obviously, for all the AFL fans out there, we're trying to do that. but
Competitive advantage. Let's go.
but there's other ways you can win. In life, like that's
Can I ask a
what it's
question?
about.
Does it change the wins and losses if you have that cohesion in a different way with your team as well? Like if you're doing all this work together and you've got that community and you've got that connection, you're seeing that it's making a difference to you and your teammates and stuff, or the team more broadly. Does it change how the wins and losses sit? Like, can you be more honest about how that loss feels? Do you know what I mean? Internally, does it change things a bit?
Yeah, it's like anything, you're going through something together. There's inherently deeper connection and camaraderie with that. So, I think it's a good thing.
Love that.
I feel like we could keep talking about this particular section of the podcast for ages.
I'm from Britain. I need to know more about footy.
Funny to look at the camera like, oh yes, we're trying to win the premiership, but you will get flogged in the media for a bad game if this comes out the week of a bad game, and it's like,
so interesting.
Get back in your box because the mainstream media doesn't want you.
That always happens.
Yeah.
It is a challenge. Like inherently, mate, if I don't play well or get 100 Supercoach points, Grundy, stick to your day job.
Yeah. I think, quite brave for everyone to come and speak about this stuff, but can see how some footy players just do stick to that.
And I suppose, for me, I'm not on this couch as an authority or someone that has deep experience or expertise in this space. I'm sitting here today as someone that is curious and open-minded and just wanting to be here and be a part of these conversations and educate myself so that, I can put my hand up and say, hey, I'm not always going to get these conversations right, but I'm open to learning. I'm open to listening and being a part of that journey.
And then we have in this very moment, you doing that and knowing that there could be that policing or that get back in your box or the comments afterwards from him doing this, but still doing it anyway because it's
Well, that's courage.
living in your authenticity, right?
Yeah.
So it's like a case study of the very thing we're talking about while we sit here.
100%.
Courage is put your head over the ball, but not only, it's showing up like this and then showing up, at home and behind the scenes when nobody's looking.
Exactly.
Well, I was going to ask you about that. When the young kids have asked you about or emphasized toughness, is their idea of it physical toughness? Because then you mentioned you do have to be tough in some parts of your life, but for the most part, you got to be tough emotionally and mentally in life. Very few circumstances call for you to be physically tough.
It's so true. And I think that comes through a lot in how guys in heterosexual relationships, it's like, I got to be the protector. And I say, yeah, sure. But that's very unlikely that you're going to need to protect your partner from some external threat. Here in Australia, we're pretty privileged like that. Whereas I'm kind of are you safe? Can you protect emotionally and mentally and relationally and sexually? Do we have a grid for that kind of, what skills, what traits, what values do we need to bring to do that kind of protection for those that are in our care? And not in this paternalistic way, but in this mutuality way, in this exchange that we have with others. And yeah, on the courage front, it's like, yeah, let's celebrate courage. You know, we do on Anzac Day, we celebrate courage in sporting achievements and huge sacrifice. But I feel like we have too narrow a lens on courage. And it's like, wow, there are so many other places that we show up in courage.
Yeah, absolutely. Feel like we could keep talking about all that for ages, and there's some great contributions from everyone. So thank you a lot. But I'm keen to shift the focus to double standards around sex and how gender expectations can sort of play into how we approach intimacy. And there's a lot of talk, and it's come up in a lot of podcasts about body count and feeling the pressure to, if you're a man, have a high body count growing up. Did you sort of feel that growing up, Blake?
A little bit, but just talking about double standards, I mean, I feel like it is mostly men that benefit from that double standard, so it is harder for me to sort of recollect what those are because I,
Yeah.
probably didn't experience the negative side of it.
Yeah, what was your experience, Gina? Because obviously we know the flip side of that is that, women are expected to have low body counts.
I think I just remember being the body. Like, I just remember being
Yeah.
the potential body of the body count. It just, yeah, like, the double standards are so interesting. And I think what's so hard for young women and girls as they're growing up is that we really socialize. The gender expectations for girls are very much, we could go through them individually, but actually they're very much based in this idea of like your appearance and your desirability are the most important things about you, but your sexual desire is deviant and evil. So like as you try and grow up and you try and navigate your own sexuality, interacting with your own body and appearance, just that,
Yeah.
it becomes really hard because it's like, well, that should be the most important thing, and you should make sure that that's to everyone else's standards, mostly men. This is very heteronormative framing, when we're talking about gender. But at the same time, you should be terrified of it, and it's a bad thing. It's kind of a sin. You shouldn't have sexual desire.
Yeah.
So you're kind of constantly trying to navigate that, which is obviously impossible. It was never created for it to be possible, if you to be able to win, right? Just like masculine stereotypes.
Yeah.
And so I just remember this constant experience of being like, I need to be really beautiful and constantly self-optimize. I need to be desirable, but don't be desirable because then I'm a slut and I'm going to get absolutely ripped down. But also being scared of boys and sex because I was seeing lots of objectification. We talk about body count, the name itself, body.
Yeah.
There's no human attached to that. It's just a body.
Yeah.
So there's just like a lot of that happening, and growing up just being like, none of the language, but all of the feelings. Like just sitting with all of the feelings of it, being like, I think I'm meant to be. Like, I remember being a teenager and like only understanding myself in response to how boys saw me. Like, I actually didn't understand. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
I didn't
well,
actually.
We know we can't know what you mean. That is so powerful.
But you see it in
Thank
schools
you.
every day, right? Like,
Yeah.
you just. I remember being like, I'm hitting like, let's use a different name, Stan. That wasn't his name, but I was like, I'm Stan's girlfriend, and like not being able to connect with like me as an individual. And I remember my mum sitting with me when I said that because I was crying because we were breaking up, me and Stan. And my mum was
Bon
like,
voyage, Stan.
Bon voyage, Stan. That's what I said when we broke up. And my mum being like, what do you mean you can't see yourself outside of being Stan's girlfriend? And me being like, I actually don't know what I like or what I think. And I was like 14 because it was just every movie I'd seen, everything had shaped this idea that I was to be a girlfriend or to be dated or to be looked at or to be, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And my family were really supportive about all the ways that I was creative and different and in whatever that means, and like what I was interested in and how I was independent. But there was a moment there for about 3 or 4 years as a teenager where that wasn't having an effect. I was getting lost in that stream of gendered expectations. And I came back, thankfully. But I just remember those double standards, it just being like the boys at school are just like, I don't know, like dating and kissing with girls, and it was like go out the back and then everyone's going to watch and they're going to kiss at the same time. And God, the pressure of having to be a boy and be expected to be dating and doing all that stuff, not good. But just feeling like if that was me, like I'd be ostracized because it would be, I'm a slut. Like I'd be, you know what I mean? And I see that so much in the rooms that I'm in now, like this girls who are just at war with their bodies and themselves. And it's like, no wonder, because society has told you that your body is a bad thing, but it's also the most important thing about you.
Yeah.
And that's such hard territory to navigate.
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
Gina. That is so powerful.
Pleasure.
Like that is something that I hope us as men listening along can like sit with that, reflect on that, and have empathy, because I think this isn't about going, oh wow, it's so much worse for you or worse for boys. It's
100.
about going, wow, I have never had to stand in your shoes and know what that's to feel like. And
Yeah.
I'm deeply sad about that. And we all will benefit if we can listen, empathize, and go, hey, how do we like level this out so that we can both have healthier experiences?
If you look at the list of gender expectations, if we put them side by side, I mean, it's never ending, right? But if we put the most 10 important ones, every single time a conversation about masculinity or what girls or women go through, not that those are the only people that exist, but we talk in that construct all the time, men or women. Every time we talk about that, it's like, who's got it worse, like you say? Who's struggling the most? Yeah, but boys are really struggling. Yeah, but girls are dealing with all this stuff. The reality is we are all unified by the fact that we are living under restrictive stereotypes and they are completely controlling our relationship with ourselves and with each other.
Yeah.
And so unless we're able to sit like this and seek to understand each other's experience and then go, oh, I can see how that part of the stereotype means that that happens to you, which then means that it becomes my struggle because it's imposed on me in violence. And I can see how, as a woman, you know, all the times when I was a teenager where I would reinstate really harmful ideas of masculinity on boys around me because the way that they would act, I would be like, oh, like, grow some balls. Like, I can see those
Oh,
moments,
yeah.
right? I have to be honest about those moments.
Yeah.
And we have to sit together and have these types of discussions to be able to sort of overcome that, but we don't do it. And so you're right, it's not a competition. And when we share and we can see into each other's experience, it becomes very powerful.
And it has a very toxic symbiotic relationship because it's like you're being trained to be an object, to be subservient to a man. And then this bloke goes out, says, hey, you're my girlfriend. We head on out. And then the boys are bantering with me, being like, did you get some?
course.
You know, are you under the thumb? You got the ball and chain. And so then, you know, it's just reinforcing this idea that you're an object, that I should have power over you within that dominant heterosexual kind of nonsense that we're all subjected to. And it's like, am I not fully man enough if I'm not like in full control and putting you in your place? And
So then
and
our
we're
sense of self becomes dependent on how we can consume someone else or how we treat someone else. Yeah.
Oh my God. Amazing to sit here and listen to that. I feel like someone's got to give you the clicks
Oh,
of
thank you.
validation, Gina. Both of you, incredible. How else does that sort of play out in relationships, do you think, Dan?
Yeah, I think for all of us, and I'll just start with me, it like conditioned me, and especially like you take social norms, you take porn culture to reinforce this idea that it's like, I should be taking sex from my partner, irrelevant at whether she's enjoying this. Does she like this? Am I in tune with her needs, her safety, her well-being, her pleasure? It's just like, I got to get what I want. And then I got to go tell the boys about my conquest. Like that's what it's suggesting. And it's suggesting that any reluctance or not being in the mood should just be overcome because I'm entitled to that. Now, I'm not saying every bloke thinks that or likes that or wants that dynamic, by no means. I'm just saying that I think that is the mainstream kind of message that we internalize consciously, unconsciously. And it is playing out in this notion of entitlement and not being in tune and a sense of like, if conquest and power over is how you relate romantically and then obviously sexually, that means that you're not desiring to be like, does this feel good for you? Do I care about your needs and wants? And I think there is this desire to kind of push past that. And if women and girls, and again, I don't want to like, explain on behalf and jump in, Gina, and correct me, is like, and if they're being pressured to go along, to submit, to acquiesce to boys' demands and to kind of make sure that they're a good enough object who's desirable, that's a really ugly recipe. And it certainly doesn't mean that we're victim blaming here. I'm just looking at the broader cultural dynamics of how we've got to a bit of a mess, especially in this heterosexual context.
Yeah, I think as well with identity, it goes back to if your gender is so much of your identity, then your sense of self or view of self is dependent on whether you dominate or whether you conquest or whether you get, or whether, right?
Yeah.
So the conquest is never about the person for whom that you're consuming. It's always just about you, isn't it? It's always about what it makes you feel, or will I feel more of a man if I'm doing this? And I think you're right. I think as women and girls, we are encouraged and coerced into ideas of femininity that are about being seen, desperate to be loved, as everyone is, as boys are, as men are, desperate to belong, self-optimizing all the time, and knowing that we can never really win. And I want to be very explicit about this because this is also a huge reason as to why we see girls in schools and adult women in competition with each other. Our gendered expectations list, the messages we get from society about what it means to be a woman or a girl, are actually completely authored around other people. When you actually look at our list, it's about being beautiful appearance, desirability, as I've said. It's also about things like being nurturing, being a mother, taking care of everyone, being submissive to the dominance of the masculine stereotype, pleasing, being agreeable, being quieter, being smaller, being consumed, right? So when that's the messages you're getting and you believe that your identity is your gender, then your sense of self is about appeasing that list.
Yeah.
And you get policed for not appeasing that list. I've been policed my entire life being too loud, for having too many opinions, because the list says I should be small and quiet and agreeable, that I should kind of agree with everything that's given to me. To get in a room of girls and be like, hey, you know how sometimes we treat each other? There's forces at play here. You know how sometimes we feel all these things and we don't talk about it because we're all in competition about who's going to do it best? There's a reason for that. Like, I want to hear your thoughts and I want to hear what you're angry about. And I think that's where we start to go, oh, I don't have to be the object, or oh, I don't have to be consumed, or oh, I don't have to be quiet. And that's really important.
Such a great insight into experiences and pressures. I don't want to speak for every guy on the couch, but that I've never had to experience. And I feel like you mentioned it, Dan, at some point, that just increases empathy, and that's what hopefully helps change our mindsets. So thank you, Gina, for sharing that, and thank you as well, Dan, for your contributions. Brodie, I feel like, I don't put words in anyone's mouth, but I feel like everyone was getting a lot out of that. I saw you nodding along furiously. What was said there, does that sort of resonate with your experience and expectations?
Yeah, it's profound. Like, just to be in this space and have your vulnerability to share that is, we're all better for hearing that. I just wanted to ask Dan a question around your experience. So how do men, it feels like they don't know how to accept rejection when they're told explicitly no, or maybe they're not explicitly told no because of those dynamics, but to be able to read the room, the nuance, you're talking about sexual chemistry and what that dynamic looks like. Can you just speak to or provide some color on what you're seeing on the ground floor?
Yeah, I think that we just haven't had opportunities to reflect on this. Like, how do you navigate rejection? How do we come up with a vision of our sexuality where the other, as in the person you're with, their experience matters to you just as much as your experience? Like, what does that really mean? It means like this person that I'm with, like, I want to know that you're having a good time and I enjoy that. And that's hot. And I want that for you, not just like what I can get from this. And I just think we have to just continue to normalize having chats, especially with blokes. So it's like, of course you want your partner to enjoy this. Like, why would you not want your partner to enjoy, whether it's a hookup or actually a long-term relationship of intimacy and discovering one another? Like, why wouldn't you want that to be a good, fun, pleasurable thing for everybody? And I think when we can stray from these limited ideas around conquest, and it's like, I'm not, doing this to then perform for my mates and report back at the pub. It's like, no, like this other person's experience matters to me. The fact that they feel safe, connected, intimate pleasure from our experience, like that's what we're aiming for together. And we're both seeking that. So I think we just have so much work to do in normalizing that, because I actually see it and it sits there and it comes up in our chats. I just think like everybody has got this kind of idea that I have to be this like sex fiend who this is what I'm about to prove something to the boys, when I want to kind of be a bit suspicious on that and call the bluff. Like, I actually don't know if that's how we all really want to show up. I'm not saying that those attitudes don't exist and try and like just whitewash this, but I think we owe it to all of us to say, actually, guys, I don't know if we want that or we would find that fulfilling, or whether that's just purely performative. And so I think that's what I see in uncorking those conversations with boys as they progress through high school, and just getting them to be a bit suspicious about those messages that they've
Question
received.
it, yeah. And that all starts outside of sexual encounters. Like, the
Yes,
reality is
yes.
like sexual encounters are high stake environment, right? For anyone. So like, if you're talking about any part of a healthy relationship with yourself, because I actually always believe that this stuff comes back to yourself. And I don't mean individually, I mean like structurally. It comes back to people. Like, a rejection of, like, a guy being rejected can be so uncomfortable because it's a rejection of their masculinity. And it's, you know what I mean? Like, it's almost a fracturing of your masculinity. It's like, oh, if that woman says no to me, then I don't feel like the man that I feel I am. It's a real self-conscious moment. And then there's a level of emotional regulation. You need to be able to sit with that uncomfortability and go like, oh, I'm I'm angry or I'm upset, but that's not going to become anyone else's problem. Like, how am I going to deal with that? How am I going to process that in community with people you care about? If you've not been taught that, or there haven't been a lot of safe spaces for you to do that, you don't have those skills all the time, and that's not your fault. But we have to find spaces to get that, and that has to start outside the bedroom. Like, how do you handle the smallest of projections? How do you handle the policing of your masculinity? How do you handle it with a guy in school calls you gay? Can you emotionally regulate yourself there? Can you actually go even one step better and say, like, hang on, do you know what that language does? Do you know what culture that upholds for people? What if I was and you didn't know? Like, what would that
Yeah.
do to me? Who are you in those moments, in those micro high stakes moments? Because it will make you a safer, better person when it really matters.
Really important stuff that everyone said. And we do have to sort of move on to the next topic, which is hard to do, but I think, and you can probably speak to this, Blake, I feel like we might have answered your quote unquote silly question in there somehow. So sort of you've had the experience of fans coming up and saying, oh, well, what are women like? What do we have to do? What do women want? And so do we think like sort of that deep listening and genuine empathy piece is maybe the answer to that? I don't want to, if there's something more to add to that, Gina, of course, please
Yeah,
do.
I think, well, look, I'm one woman, and for me to sit here and say I speak for all women would be really dumb. Like, I don't know. But what I would say is that, firstly, I'd say, like, why are we asking the question? What do we want from the question? But instead of answering the question, it'd be like, there's something behind that question when you ask the question. What do we need to do? What's the bare minimum? Is it just because we want to be like, cool, I can just sort the bare minimum out so I can get dating? So, like, I'm not being policed anymore. People are not worrying about it. Or is it because you're really like, I really care about this. Like, I really want to be a good person. I want to be an expansive person. I want to be able to grow. So knowing why you're asking that question, reflecting on that in the first place. But I would say that in this work, and I've been doing it for 10 years, the most change happens from men and boys sitting down with each other, having compassionate, understanding, accountable conversations, and working on themselves.
Yeah. Okay.
Because actually, I'd like to really frame it, and this might be a tough thing to hear, it might be uncomfortable. It's not for us, it's for you, and then our lives get better.
Okay.
The impact
yeah.
of, do you know what I mean? The impact of restrictive masculinities is hurting men and boys, and then it's really hurting women and girls too. It's making us very unsafe, and it's hurting marginalized people.
Yeah.
It has to be for you, because it's not charity.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's not like, it's, as a white woman, I could say, well, what shall I do for black people? Like, what do I need to do to make sure I've done the bare minimum, or I've ticked the box, or, I don't want to do that. I want to really interrogate, how am I living? Who am I? And that's going to make the meaningful change that's going to actually make the difference. So it's like, it's for you. And also, by definition, by doing it for yourself,
Yeah.
it will make all of our lives better.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. So to come back to you, Blake, do you feel like that kind of answers the question?
No, I feel like that is, such a good way of putting it. It always feels very performative, but I think going back to like what you said about it is for yourself. And that's been the best, like doing comedy has been the best thing for rejection for me personally, because I'm rejected every 15 seconds. Like,
Real-time feedback.
so the best thing to do is just move on, get on with it, and
Yeah.
then try to do better.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's like there's often a question that goes around on socials that's like, what do you do to make women feel safer? And I always want to take the feel out. I always want to be like, what do you do that makes women
Yeah,
safer?
God.
Like, like that, just that one step of like the real impact, rather than the like, it looks good and I want to do the bare minimum. Nah, we can go deeper. We see it every day in the workshops. We can do it.
So we've spoken a lot about shifting from sort of good men or good women to good humans, which I know is sort of something you touched on, that you like that phrasing of it, Brodie. So how do you personally actually go about doing that? I know it's a bit broad, but sort of what's that process been like for you?
Well, Gina sort of touched on it. It's that journey inwards, probably holding up that mirror, starting with yourself. Whether that's, for me, I've had great benefit in, therapy and speaking with, my trusted inner circle that don't necessarily always reinforce, my train of thought. May challenge me to think a bit differently. Am I thinking about this in a helpful way or an unhelpful way? And so I suppose for me, I just try and surround myself with different voices that are constructive, and are also aligned with the vision of the person I want to become. So, hey, like, we know you're passionate about this, or you've told me you want to be the sort of, husband that does this. like, I'm not sure you're living that out right now. Or
Yeah, that compassionate accountability.
yeah,
Yep, love that. Whereas, has there been a moment where, like, you showing up like this, you've seen how that's impacted, for example, another bloke, or given them permission to show up in a healthier way? But yeah, I've just, for me, I've witnessed it in others where it's like you just see the guard come down a bit,
Real
and it's
thing.
like, yeah, great, we can just like not perform so
yeah,
much
I
now.
have to answer that question. I think it, because quite often with these conversations or topics, whether they're difficult conversations, we, spit words, and it's actually about getting behind the words to the person. What are you really saying, or what do you really mean? And when I go back to my silly question around that's woke stuff. If you actually ask the person again to clarify whether it's banter or that's, like I said, that's gay. Hey, hold on a second. Can you just explain to me what that means? Um, in the right context, in the right environment where that person does not feel threatened. Well, hey, there was a time when you said this. I was just wondering, like, what were you, what were you thinking then? Or like, what did you mean by that? And then quite often the armor will come off and they'll go,
Mm.
there's a moment of consciousness. And it's, I think in that group norms and group think and those, the man box that you're talking about, you're just operating on autopilot. It's just, that's just what you do. That's just, the culture, like what you do here, whether it's the group chats, whatever it is, it's very much just unconscious. But when you stop to reflect, whether it's, you and yourself or through conversation, and you ask the person to double down and have that moment of clarity, it's often, oh, I'm not actually sure what I meant by that. That was just, I just said that. I'm not actually sure what I meant.
Yeah.
And it's I think it's so important to be like, hey, I'm not judging you. This isn't a superiority thing of I'm all knowing. It's just like, hey, that positive inquiry of can we get to a space where we are more self-aware and we are aware of the impact that we have, going back to the respect, the empathy.
Is that the perfect example of calling in behavior?
100%.
Can we have a
Yeah.
quick explanation of
Yeah,
calling in
calling
again?
is was coined by Loretta J. Ross, and it's the concept of like seeking to understand without justifying. So, like, you're asking questions, you're opening up a space that's non-judgmental to try and explore how that person got there, rather than calling out, which is like a statement. Hey, I don't think you should have said that. Da da da. Immediately it shut down. There's no connection. You're not communicating anymore. So calling in is an invitation, and that's
And
exactly what you've
that's
just
And I'll
described.
just say, like, for everyone listening, like, and I'm sure we've all been in those situations, it's so challenging because of
Yeah.
the constructs and the gender norms that exist. And if you're seen to be, you know, um, not in the in crowd, there can be real like consequences for that. So getting insight into how to do that the right way is super valuable. Dan, do you have any insights in your workshops with ways in which you like to call in behavior or give
Yeah,
examples
I
of
just
that?
stay curious. I use the language of I stay graciously curious. I'm like, tell me more about that. What did you mean? How does that show up in your life? Like, help me understand that more. And I flagged that with them. I guess what I'm thinking about in this conversation in terms of, I think when we can be more authentic and we can take down our masks and put our guards down, the fact that it then gives permission to guys to be like, actually, I'm struggling, or hey, have you got a moment? And I guess my question is like seeking that, like in having these conversations, because we actually care about the well-being of men and boys. And when we're seeing increased loneliness, isolation, suicidal ideation, I'm like, I want us as men and boys to be able to signal to our mates, not saying that we only have male friends, but like to signal to them, like, I'm loyal, I'm safe, I'm honest, I'm real. Like, if you're going through stuff, like, I'm not going to throw you under the bus, shame you for that. I'm going to sit with you and just listen to you and hear you out. And I literally think to myself, like, what would change culturally overnight if every bloke, every young man felt they had one or two people in their corner who they could just be real and authentic with, who, by the way they're showing up, has just signaled to others, like, I'm safe, I'm here for you. I'm not going to throw you under the bus to get a laugh from these other blokes over there.
I just wanted to also name something which is a bit sticky, but like in the name of these uncomfortable conversations, they don't always feel super good. Hey, like I think it's really important to name that. It's really important as well that accountability and compassionate accountability is happening between men, because for a very, very long time, and I just want to make this really explicit because it's really important. None of us would be sitting here having conversations on gender if Black and marginalized and trans people hadn't been doing it for the last 100 years. All of these people have done all this incredible work, these giants on the shoulders we stand. And for such a long time, more marginalized people have been having to hold people accountable. And it's been really hard and sometimes unsafe too. And so now we're in this really beautiful space where, like, in our communities, we get to do that. Where men are going like, oh, hang on, like, I'm not going to wait for a woman to have to call me out because I've done something for the 7th time. Like, I know, like, my 2 mates will sit down with me and have this, like, curious, compassionate conversation where I can actually reflect on myself and become a better person in the process. And that's a really beautiful space for us to be in. So that accountability, I think, between men is actually like love under a different name. I think if you hold someone accountable in a loving way, that is you showing them that you really care about them. And all of that is to also say that it's really important, but it is really uncomfortable. And you only get better at it the more you try it. You're going to sit there and be like, oh, I don't know. And like, why is he saying this to me? And God, I'm not saying the right thing. And it's going to be horrible. But like, the more you do it, the better you get at it, the more you grow.
It's kind of like uncomfortable to acknowledge certain things as well, but I'm definitely ignorant to the origins of these conversations.
Yeah, and that's
So
okay. That's why I wanted to name it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And like, I don't know about you guys, but it always gives me this sense of like, I'm late to the party, but I'm here, and you know, get to work. Like, don't stuff it up now that you're here. I want to just ask quickly, you're all obviously role models for people in many different ways, and role models for people in this space, whether it's because you work in it every day or just by virtue of coming on the podcast. So just to quickly go around the couch, who are your role models in this space? And I might start with you, Dan.
Everyday people that no one would know who they are.
Yeah,
They've
real.
just shown up with authenticity, love, challenged me behind the scenes, called me higher, invited me to think about what it would look like for me to live out my values. Like, I think of those people because they're the ones that you really do. You do the work with, me, you just do life with.
Yeah, yeah.
And in that, you get healthier and you, can show up better. When I think about who I've read that's shaped me, like so many different people that I think about both literature and nonfiction authors who have shaped me when they've challenged ideas and helped you to empathize with other people's experiences. You know, like right now, like I've just got bell hooks on my mind because I've just read
My
so
northern
much.
light
Yeah.
in my life.
Yeah. And so you go, wow, there are people who've been thinking about this. And I agree, you know, like as a bloke, I have so much privilege to say things. And I say some pretty uncomfortable things in my sessions that do cause other people to get a pushback that I won't get. So yeah, I think there's a lot of unheralded everyday heroes who just live out and have challenged me and challenged each other as we've just tried to get healthier on this little blue and green dot that we're floating on.
Yes. Oh my God, I love that end of that sentence. Yeah, bell hooks is my North Star in everything I do in gender, masculinities, feminism. She's everything to me. I've studied her for years. And then there's a few others like Akala, Jackson Katz. I have about 6 or 7 different people that I look to as leaders, thought leaders in this space for me, the past or now.
Look into that. What about you, Blake?
Yeah, I'd probably just say my family were probably the only ones. I feel like that's the problem with most people is that they don't have people in their family who, there's just no restriction or judgment. But my family have always been, just be who you are and be happy within that.
Yeah, I'd say my fiance and immediate family like Blake, but from a sort of an influence perspective, athletes that I have dealt with that have inspired me is probably Harry Garside, Ben Brown, that I played football with. Harry's obviously like a boxer and just continues to challenge the status quo around those gender norms. And that's something that I definitely subscribe to is, anyone that's watching or playing, AFL footy, that they can, be the best version of themselves, whatever that looks like, that, they can just continue to challenge these sort of concepts and, live out their dreams.
Hell yeah.
Incredible. This was such a great chat, everyone. And I think the vulnerability that everyone showed was awesome. So thank you so much to all of you. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Gina. Thank you, Blake.
Team.
Thank you,
Thanks for
Brodie.
hosting
Thanks,
us.
Thank you.
For more information, you can go to teachusconsent.com and visit Teach Us Consent on Instagram.